It's 721 News Talk, WLOB, AM 1310, streaming live at WLOBradio.com. And of course, you're watching us on WPME TV. I'm Ray Richardson. Thanks for joining us. In the studio is State Representative Amy Volk from the coastal area of Scarborough. Good morning.
Good morning.
Nice to see you.
Thank you.
So we've been talking about the tax bill. Governor LePage was on Friday. I don't know if you had a chance to hear him or not. And we were talking about, I think it's LD 849, is that right?
Yes.
It was an opportunity to cut the income tax in the state of Maine from 7.95% down to 4% based on a series of financial triggers. You didn't support it. I was surprised at that.
Yep.
But I know you do your homework, as I said earlier, and there must be a reason, and I figure you'd probably tell us. Hey, first of all, explain the bill, if you would, so everybody understands what's going on, and then explain why you didn't support it.
Well, in the event of a surplus, which we don't expect anytime soon, the state would take that money. Normally that money follows a cascade, and the first thing in that cascade to get funded is the rainy day fund, essentially.
So we have a backup.
Yeah, and right now that's at 35%, I think. Or no, it's 40%, I think. And this wanted to take 40%, follow that cascade, but 40% of the cascade would go to tax relief. And so it would decrease the income tax rate, the top income tax rate, and, little bits at a time, based upon whatever the surplus was. But there would be no going back up again from that point. And eventually the goal is to get down to 4%. The bill's not dead, actually. One of the reasons I voted against it was the House Chair of Appropriations, Pat Flood, didn't support it. I actually know of a prominent member of the tax committee in our party who also voted for it, but told me he really didn't like the bill. But I believe we've worked out a compromise. And included in that income tax is also some property tax relief in the form of fully funding the circuit breaker program, which is important. And that was important to me as well. But I think we've worked out a compromise, actually, that's going to make everyone happy. And I believe if we vote for it today, which is possible,
will it accomplish the same goals of bringing the income tax down? I mean, as you know,
eventually.
The goals for people like me have been for a very long time to eventually eliminate the income tax and go to a consumption-based tax, which would fund our government, and actually, if we did it correctly, would fully fund our government. We wouldn't have to worry so much because it would be based on the broad economy. When our economy is doing well, our government would do well. When our economy is not doing as well, the government, like everyone else, would have to be really tight with the money. But if we don't spend every dime we get, if we put money aside when we're in big years, instead of doing like we did with the King years when we had that $250 million surplus and we just decided, well, this is going to go on forever and blew it. If we put money aside in the lean years, then we'll be fine.
Absolutely. And what this does is it just actually allocates slightly higher percentages to those items in the cascade before it gives the property tax.
So in other words, if let's say we have $1 million or $100, let's go with $100. We have a $100 surplus. Under your new proposal, a compromise proposal, 40% of that would go to the rainy day fund.
No, not quite. We're not going to. That's what I believe. That's the current figure is 40%. No, I think that the proposal is actually 28%.
So 28% would go to the rainy day fund.
Yeah.
Then what percentage would go to the circuit breaker program?
The circuit breaker program is included in the income tax relief package. So that's not broken out. It's not broken out in anything I've seen. Okay. But one other little issue, though, is that I know that Pat Flood had a concern about possibly that impacting our bond rating if we're not putting as much money away in our rainy day fund. And so he had said on Friday that there was a possibility that we would have to keep it at 35% as opposed to 28%, which is what I think we're going to be voting on today. But, so,
in other words, what we're trying to do here is the goal still to get to 4% for income taxes?
Yeah, it's just going to take a little bit longer. And, I'm with you. But we weren't proposing to offset these cuts in income tax with any sort of fair tax, like a consumption tax or anything like that.
Well, and the fear has been is that if you don't do it all in one bill, it's not going to happen.
Right.
I think that what we really ought to go to here is a consumption tax, so that look, instead of taxing the sweat of a person's brow with the income they earn, you tax them based on consumption. And if we do that, Maine would flourish. I mean, you exempt life essentials
Right.
like rent and mortgage, water, sewer, electricity, heating for fuel for heating rather, and non-prepared foods, and then you tax everything else. Now I know this will upset a lot of the lobbyists up there who are constantly lobbying not to have their product or service taxed, but you tax everything else. And if you do that, the government will do fine, and we can also manage our own tax burden doing that.
Yeah. Hey, I would be fine with that. I just wasn't comfortable with that, with 849 as it was, and I didn't get any feedback from my district saying that they wanted me to pass it. I heard from some people that I have never heard from before saying, hey, I don't really see the point in this. I'm
And
happy
what were
to
their
pay.
concerns?
Well, I think that people in my district are really, really fed up with education being cut. Scarborough gets very little state aid. We're a minimum receiver from the state, and we've seen our school budget cut dramatically over the last 5 years. We've lost a lot of good teachers. I've personally seen my kids' education impacted by these cuts. It's been very frustrating, and so I think that my experience with talking to people in my district is that education is extraordinarily important to them, and my fear was that a decrease in the income tax without any offset anywhere else would eventually result in further cuts to education, and I can't justify that for my constituents.
How do we go about dealing with the issue of public education, though? Because, and we've faced it in Westbrook, we originally thought we were going to see a $253,000 cut at the state level. It's now about $607,000, which is a really tough number for us to deal with, particularly when our enrollment has remained steady as opposed to a lot of districts where they saw enrollment go down. But statewide, public education enrollment is dramatically down, particularly from the top. It was 249,000 kids in 1977, I think. We're headed toward 185,000 kids very shortly, if we're not there already. That's a dramatic drop in the number of enrolled kids in public school. And what you've seen is enrollment come way down and costs skyrocket. How are we going to address that in the state of Maine?
It's a tough one. People want local control, but local control is
Costs money,
extremely expensive, and people of the state need to see that. And it's tough, and it's particularly tough to deal with these rural districts where it's not easy to consolidate services, because then you're talking about schools that are 50, 75 miles apart being administered by the same people.
But I go back to this, and I've said this forever. An involved parent will be involved, and parents who aren't involved will make excuses. So large school districts are just